Clarence Edward Big House Gaines, All-American football player who ended up becoming a Naismith Hall of Fame basketball coach. Came to little Winston-Salem Teachers College as an assistant football coach in 1945 to just make a little money so that he could follow his aspirations of becoming a dentist, because he had received an acceptance letter to Howard University Dental School. But because he ran out of money, he ended up coming to Winston-Salem Teachers College in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, as an assistant football coach to another Morgan State graduate, Brutus Wilson. After staying here 1 year, Brutus Wilson left. And guess who became the head coach of everything and the athletic director? Clarence Edward Big House Gaines. So in 1993, he retired after being on the job for 47 years. Now that in itself is rare. My relationship with Coach Gaines goes all the way back to before I was born, because in the year 1946, which is the first year that he took over everything, as we say, Winston-Salem Teachers College, my father came to Winston-Salem to work at the local black high school, Atkins High School, where he was the assistant principal, the English teacher, the guidance counselor, and also the head basketball coach. And when my father came to Winston-Salem, he had coached basketball for 8 years in Henderson Institute. As a matter of fact, 2 of his teams were national champions. And some of his close friends were Johnny McClendon, who had been at North Carolina College in Durham as an assistant coach since 1941. And also Jake Gaither, who was a childhood friend, who worked at Florida A&M, who ended up becoming very successful at Florida A&M. But Jake Gaither was also the football coach at Henderson Institute. And when Mr. Carey came to Winston-Salem, North Carolina, he was also an official of both sports in the CIAA. So when he and Coach Gaines met each other, my father was about 10, 11 years older than Coach Gaines. They struck up a friendship that lasted 42 years until my father died. So my relationship with Coach Gaines is more or less like a person. I never played any basketball for him, but he was always around my house when I was growing up. He and my father were very, very good friends. So I was fortunate enough to break through on television back in the 90s. So when he retired in 93, I decided that it would be very important for me to interview him. And I didn't want to interview him as a sports writer. I wanted to interview him as a just normal person. And I wanted him to just tell me his story from the beginning. So therefore, the interviews that I did with him, the first one in 1993, after 3 days after he retired, it's a very up-close and personal interview. And a lot is revealed. Some things you may know and some things you may not know. But for those of you who never knew Coach Gaines, you will get a lot out of this interview, because it offers you insight into the character of the man, as well as the character of the pioneers who came before us, who made great sacrifices so that we can have what we have today. Coach, you retired now.
Yep, the age caught up with me, state law caught up with me, so I'm out of here.
Oh, okay.
you're going to stay affiliated with basketball, though, right?
One way or the other, really. You kind of bounce around. People will ask you to do clinics, and people think I can save the youth program, and have an engagement to go out to Denver to talk to little kids. And we have with our youngsters is a self-image deal. And I tell anybody who was surrounded that I came from out in Kentucky, we were poor, boy. Pretty hard to describe how poor we were. And if I can do it, so can they. And I think really I've never had too much of a problem with communicating with kids or people either. So now I'm going to do a whole bunch of reading and talk with the those people who deal with early childhood programs and find out what kids like, what they want, and really through sports, I will be able to communicate with them and get them to see themselves in a different light.
Well, I would say you've probably enjoyed coaching basketball, even though your intentions when you finished college was to become a dentist, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of stumbled into it. I didn't have any money. I had this big acceptance letter to Howard University Dental School, and looked up, and I was naive enough to believe that they didn't continue playing football, that's basketball, so you had to have some money. And when you look back in 1945, that was the year I graduated from college, the Depression was just ending, because in 1941, in Baltimore on Pennsylvania Avenue, that's where the movies, the Royal Theater, and all the rest of these places where you could buy a hot dog and a soda for a nickel. And
those days are gone.
oh, I tell kids that now, they look at me like I'm crazy. When I came to Winston-Salem, in the Greensboro area here, Safe Bus Company was probably the only black-owned bus company in America at that time. And it was pretty hard to ride that bus because it's 6 cents. You had the nickel, but you couldn't find the penny.
Oh, okay. Times were that hard.
Times were that hard. As the war ended, unions came into the South, and Western Electric, which is now AT&T, Westinghouse, the pay scales escalated. First year I was at Winston-Salem, for example, I was being paid more than the public school teachers were. And I really didn't know, because the room and board was thrown in. And I tell kids I made $1,800.
Did you have your master's degree when you first came to the state?
No, I just graduated.
From Morgan State.
From Morgan, but this $1,800, I don't mean $1,800 a month.
Oh, okay.
$1,800 a year.
How long was the year? 12 months or 9 months?
10 months, something like that.
Oh, okay.
Didn't matter too much, because I didn't drink nor smoke, and you worked all the time. See, I was Brutus Wilson's assistant.
Okay.
And Brutus was a Morgan graduate, a heck of a guy. He passed about 3 or 4 years ago after having a career at Smithfield High School, Winston-Salem Teachers College it was at that time, State University now. He went to Shaw University, won a football championship, went back to Morgan, and worked in as a tennis and basketball and assistant football coach. And retired to Smithfield, yeah.
Did you ever think you were going to stay in basketball, or did you have thoughts about going back to dental school, or did you just forget about it?
Well, I'll tell you, when Brutus left after that 1 year and went to Shaw was a liberal arts school. The only thing we did was train elementary school teachers. And I really didn't know what to expect. During that year, there was some type of upheaval on campus. And at a ripe age, old age of 22, I didn't have sense enough to know what they were doing. So really, everybody got fired. You didn't get fired, you had to reapply for your position. Well, I went to Kentucky. I wasn't thinking about reapplying for anything. And after a couple of weeks out there, I received a call from Joe Lowry and Pat Patterson, a couple of guys with the Alumni Association, and asked me to accept the position. So at the ripe old age of 23, I ended up changed my role from assistant coach of everything to head coach of everything. Didn't know which way up was. Fortunately, though, as you trace it down, though, the war was ending, and there were a lot of guys who had married. A lot of them were returning to school. And we ended up with a pretty good crop of athletes there, guys, really.
And you were working with football and basketball?
Well,
basically everything.
Yeah, you worked with you were head coach of everything.
Oh, okay.
And had a couple of guys that were helping out. Then the next year, my friend came down, Boo Brown, who ended up in med school, who was a retired physician in physical medicine. Had to get somebody to help you watch your backside. And he should have been the basketball coach, because I was a much better football player than I was basketball player.
What position did you play in football?
I was a tackle. I was on the basketball team, and I guess first 2 or 3 years we had problems. We didn't have any problems. You didn't start basketball until after Christmas.
Right.
See, the plan was that we played Virginia State on Thanksgiving. All of the athletes, anybody who wanted to, would accept a job in the Parcel Post down Penn Station in Baltimore. And we worked those jobs 10, 12 hours a day until just about Christmas Eve. Then you took off and went home and came back and played an abbreviated basketball schedule. Basketball was really just something for a while to keep you occupied between football seasons. But all of us had played all of these sports in high school.
From 47 to 53, did you get a lot of support from the community?
Well, let's back it up. We picked up a lot of those veterans that I told you about. In 1948, we went 8-1-0 in football.
Okay.
And I was football coach of the year. We lost our last ball game up at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And from the time we started recruiting basketball players, 4 years to that date, we won our first CIA championship in 1953. The captain of that team is still in Winston-Salem, teaching, Willis Johnson.
Willis Johnson.
Yeah, Willis probably might have taught you or coached you along the way. But most of those kids came out of the New York, New Jersey area.
Now, did you start out recruiting yourself, or was you getting a lot of help from other people, just sending kids to Winston-Salem from
Well,
New
everybody
York?
that we trained.
Because I know traveling at that time wasn't as easy as it is today.
Well, it might have been a little easier. You had a trap car and gas was 16 cents a gallon. So when you had relatives, you couldn't stay in the hotels, so you probably had a relative or a friend along the way, and you didn't have a lot of money to spend. But fortunately, your father, Sam, all of us went to graduate school at New York.
Columbia University.
Columbia University.
Okay.
And 47, I guess 48 was my first year up there, and I was forced to go up there by a guy that was working with me, Archibald Morrow. Archie is now retired professor of physical education and lives in Grambling, Louisiana. So he was one of these guys that just kept insisting, said, if you're going to stay in this stuff, you got to get a degree. So all of us took off to go to Columbia. Oddly enough, we could not attend graduate school in North Carolina. So in other words, you would apply, and they would pay your tuition to go elsewhere.
Oh, okay.
So in other words, you couldn't dirt the walls of the University of North Carolina with black folks because they didn't have separate toilets down there and all that sort of thing. In Columbia, there were loads of playgrounds. And this friend of mine that was down there working with me, as I said, the guy that really should have been the basketball coach was Alvin Boo Brown, who loved to play playground basketball. So we toured the playgrounds in Harlem and over in the Bronx. And God, the basketball players were dime a dozen because none of the predominantly white schools
were recruiting.
Recruiting, they couldn't even admit the kids. But The guy that really started our recruiting program, or really influencing kids to come down, was a fellow that came in with me, Lester Gaither, from Rock Hill, South Carolina. He came in as a freshman ball player, and I came in as a freshman coach. And he always just liked to hang around with older guys. So I was the coach, and we took, it's been a kindred and a kind of a love affair that has existed all this time. But Les was working as a social worker, and he had screened out these kids and had sold them Winston-Salem Teachers College at that time. And
so after you won your first CIAA title, did recruitment become relatively easy then?
Well,
were you beginning to get a lot of recognition?
Well, you didn't get that
on
much
the playgrounds.
Well, you didn't.
You know.
You got playground recognition. You did not get that much recognition in newspapers.
Oh, okay.
and
well, we
media and such.
understand that.
But now, what really happens in anybody's recruitment program is that one good kid attracts another.
Okay.
So in other words, you go back and say, look, I'm doing good down at Winston-Salem. Why don't you come on join me?
Okay.
So it was fairly, it was much easier than it had ever been. Because all of this was entirely new to me. See,
you were learning too.
Yeah, I learned as much from those youngsters as I expect they learned. I learned more from them than they learned from me, because most of them were accomplished high school basketball players.
Coach, was Cleo Hill your first outstanding basketball player?
No, not at all. He was probably one of the most outstanding, but back in 1946, I recruited a guy from Cary, Illinois, about 40 miles from Paducah, Oris Hill.
Oris Hill.
Oris Hill was 6'7", could play the point, could play the wing, could play the hole.
He's a Magic Johnson. Man.
Well, he was as good as Magic Johnson. Well, he only stayed with me 1 year. He was a veteran, and if anybody has ever followed basketball in the Midwest, Cairo, Mound City, Carbondale, and that crowd over there, their basketball was far superior to the basketball in North Carolina, because they had facilities way back then. But he left me after 1 year and went to the Globetrotters and stayed with them for 8 years. And in other words, leave Winston-Salem Teachers College, go straight to the Globetrotters.
So he really, Cleo was not really your first pro prospect.
No.
Cleo went to the St. Louis Hawks.
He was the #1 draft choice with St. Louis Hawks, and I can truthfully say that he was probably the most scientific basketball player, the greatest assortment of moves and shots. Can you imagine a guy 6'2" in 1959, 60, and 61, blocking shots? Same thing that you see. He played above the rim. He was way beyond. He was 10 years ahead of his time. But see, during the 50s, you had Jack DeFerris, Carl Green, and Charlie Riley, a group of kids out of the Bronx and Harlem. I never did get to Brooklyn because there were too many basketball players in that immediate area. But all of those kids were professional basketball prospects, but you didn't have black folk playing professional basketball in the NBA. You might well not believe it. There's an interesting article that came out in the Asbury Park Times, whatever the name of the newspaper is, written by the resource person was Coach Delaney. Delaney is Jim Delaney's father. Jim Delaney is the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. And it was a fitting tribute to Cleo, describing his exploits, how skilled he was, and that sort of thing. People want to know really what happened to Cleo Hill. I remember that, but let me just tell you the true story, and we'll get it over with, which is revealed in this newspaper article. They came through here, and he was really recruited by Marty Blake.
Right.
Yeah, Marty was the general manager, and now Marty heads the NBA scouting service in Atlanta, Georgia. But he had the best outside game, I think, of any guard in America. Patented two-hand set shot, and drafted him #1. Paul Seymour was his coach.
Right.
With the Hawks, and when they came through during the exhibition season, the guy was averaging 24 points a ball game with the outside game alone. And I was kidding Coach. I said, you're going to have problems because all of the older guys inside, Bob Pettit, LaVellette, and that crowd didn't like it because this rookie, they needed an outside attack, so they had the outside attack, but it cut their point production down. So they got to the owner, and the owner ordered him to bench the boy. And I never will forget because I spent 2 or 3 days with him in St. Louis and traveled with him, and he came down and asked him to bench him. And you could hear him all over that little St. Louis arena, whatever it was. He said, so-and-so with you, Kerner. Ben Kerner was the owner. But it was, you didn't have the bargaining powers. So Paul Seymour quit because owner's interference. They brought a couple of guys in to fill in, and at the end of the year, no fault of his, he was no troublemaker. He was just overproductive, and these guys resented him. They blackballed him, and in turn, Kerner evidently, the owners were real close together. No one picked him up, which was probably one of the biggest crimes that ever been perpetrated in professional athletics. Guy with a beautiful future, a talented person who deserved every chance in the world, but he was denied that because of the 3 bigots that were inside. I see them now at the Hall of Fame. I don't think they've ever forgotten that. Of course, I never said anything to them about it. But Cleo Hill was probably the greatest rising star we had. Well, he was a star when he came there, really. See, college coaching, you don't have to be a genius to be a college coach. You got to be an organizer. You got to be able to communicate with people. But these kids, the high school coaches, are the ones that really start them out with their fundamentals. People come in being able to write in college, and they say, well, I developed this, that, and so forth and so on. You have to increase and improve their skills and to adjust to the problems actually that they're going to encounter.
Now, with Earl, I remember you had to begin playing in larger arenas because of the attention. Do you think the white schools in the ACC began to realize at that point in time the advantages in recruiting black athletes?
I think they knew it all the while, but the people that, the boosters clubs, the people that put up the money, I would say they were, at first they would permit a coach to bring in 1 kid, and they found out he might be lonesome there by himself. So they gave him a roommate. I think Mike Malloy down at Davidson, I don't know exactly who was coaching at that time, but he might have been the first guy.
Was it Lefty Drizel?
Lefty might have been down there, but Mike Malloy was probably the first guy in this area. And Dean Smith brought in Charlie Scott from over at Laurinburg. And I think really, as a tribute to a guy who has been kind to me and others when it wasn't popular to do so, is Dean Smith. And a real fine guy, and everything that he wins, everything that he earns, I think he deserves it. But he's just that type of a person. They knew the talent was there. At the end of every season, college all-stars would play the Globetrotters. They'd take a tour. And these black kids were just, in a lot of cases, were more talented. Well, they should have been, because the Globetrotters were playing together all year as a unit against the Washington Generals. The Washington Generals never win, but it's something actually that the people like. I see where they're going to be in Greensboro here.
Now, going back in the late 50s, early 60s, the excitement of basketball being played in the CIAA at that point in time, do you see any semblance to it in the final 64 now?
Yeah, I think most of the teams, we only brought 8 teams to the tournament. And those 8 teams had the Division I basketball players, the black kids who were not going to be accepted or permitted to play in the so-called predominantly white schools. So it was very, very competitive. Right here in Greensboro, Cal Irvin, who was a teammate of mine, Cal was a basketball player. I was somebody that set a pick for him, that sort of thing. He was at Smith and A&T and around during those days, and had lots of talented ball players.
The Big Ten was really the first league that started recruiting black kids, isn't it? And then out west?
No, I think really what's now the Big East, like LIU and St. John's and those people up there, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, and they were the first ones. Well, just like University of Indiana, Bob Knight's a good friend of mine and heck of a guy. People don't realize that if you look around and see how many major college coaches came through Indiana, how many black kids who wanted to do the right thing. Glenn Buckner, I think, is going out to Dallas, and kid over at Miami, Ohio. That's one of his boys.
You think a changing of the guard is taking place in the NBA with all these young black coaches? John Lucas?
I think so. I don't see why an owner could feel, really. There's no way in the world, really, that, of course, I can go back farther than most guys, that here you have 9 out of 10 black players on your team.
Right.
And why an intelligent young man like John Lucas, for example, and I see where Minnesota just gave
Sidney Lowe
a 3-year contract. That black guy's going to understand these people.
Well, as you were saying, they have to be good organizers.
They got to be good organizers.
Especially in the pros.
Yeah. And I don't think the whites now would not attend a basketball game or not support a team. So I read a book once on baseball, and the title of the book was "Only the Ball Was White." They say, and I put that about 10 years ago. I said, "Yep, only the coach is white." But,
Coach, we were talking about paying the athlete in college. What you think about that?
I think if you could work out a scheme from the billion-dollar contract or from the NCAA has, and 80% of the total NCAA budget comes from the Division I basketball tournament. But see, the NCAA is an organization of 3 different divisions, 1, 2, and 3. Sure, the Division I program is far more attractive, and it has been marketed. And they derive the greatest, they derive most of the money is because the Division II and Division III programs, excuse me, are just, I guess they're self-supporting. They don't lose any money with them. But if just picture that $1 billion contract, and if you could just take 1% of that, those monies really, and supplement what goes on in Division II and Division III. Let them earn it some type of way. I don't know what criteria you would have for distribution. It would really help.
Let them work in college, be on a work study.
Well, it's not a matter of work study. You see, really, as far as if this is going to be a productive thing, you can't practice but 20 hours a week now. Okay, because they said that was taken away from academics. So in other words, if he's practicing 20 hours a week, or putting 20 hours in basketball, just at every level, affix a rate of pay commensurate with what they're earning in their different schools, and let those kids live comfortable. You turn around and buy somebody, a kid's mother gets sick, and the kid's mother comes in town. She didn't have money enough to go to a hotel or restaurant. You pay the hotel, you take the mom and so-and-so home with you. It's a benefit that all kids don't have. And I think really years ago, as poor as our kids were, if we, I might have violated every rule in the book because kids just didn't have any money. You take them home, feed them, take them home, let them cook, take them home with you, sleep them, and do anything else. And I don't know what the real answer is, but as you look at Steve Sendak, for example, sent a check to Rodney Rogers for $500, just trying to test the thing. No crime has been committed unless he cashes that check. Well, it's kind of a little test case, I think, for the NCAA and some of your major institutions.
Well, at the Division I school, the alumni support is much greater, and so you have that constantly taking place, probably.
Well, I get in a lot of. I've been getting in trouble with our alumni association, Winston-Salem State University. And at Morgan, they have a varsity M club. It took them 10 years to raise $100,000. And I know for 10 years I put $100 a year. That's $1,000. There's Dr. Brown, who's a very good friend of mine. He's put $1,000 in it too. What it says in so many words, Morgan, with its great athletic reputation and its varsity M club as such, you don't have 100 people that
could give $1,000.
That have given $1,000, and this was over a 10-year period. There's no comparison. I think really most of your major universities, even the smaller ones, through their booster clubs, I would imagine in the 4 schools here in North Carolina, Duke, Wake Forest, and State, the alumni support for athletics alone, the least amount would be about $1.5 million. And as I told the people, say, you don't keep harping on that. So the alumni don't like me because if I took the money they gave each year, other than a few of our athletes that put a little money into it, I couldn't support 2 kids. But yet I'm supposed to go out and schedule a ball game maybe with Georgetown. And people have asked me, say, well, why don't you do like, well, I say Elizabeth City went out west and for maybe a $15,000 guarantee. I don't ever plan to prostitute a group of kids that I'm working with for money. And I don't think our people really like that. But in other words, you go out, you get $15,000, cost you $7 to get out there, and expenses. You come back with $7,000, you get beat 99 to nothing.
And you're embarrassed.
You're embarrassed, not only the program, but you don't.
Self-esteem.
Yeah, you don't put a kid in a situation like that. There's no, and see, I've been very friendly with Barbie, Dean, and that sort of thing. They wouldn't insult my intelligence because they know that I'm getting a different type of quality of athlete. They wouldn't even insist or offer me an invitation, not because of a black-white situation.
Right. Now, you know, years ago, to participate in sports, what would be the best advice for him today?
The best advice is to let him know that the band, the choir, the basketball team, the football team, and the track team are just a total, just a part of the educational process. And some of those things he might like, and some that he didn't, or that he won't, rather. The thing that I'm very much concerned about is that our black kids will be able to read, to write, to reason. That it must be able to communicate, answer questions. They should be able to talk about his communication skills, to write and to speak. So that means that you're taking a foreign language, you're taking some math, you're taking the English, and you know where you came from as far as history is concerned. So for God's sake, let's get with the books. Let's do a good job there. And if you turn out to be a Michael Jordan, so well and so good. As I stated a little while ago, that I think you need to look in the mirror every day at yourself. Feel proud that you're who you are, whether you're black, green, white, or purple, and that the Lord put you here for some purpose, and for God's sakes, help him find out what it is, and you work with that.
When you finish playing football?
Yeah, you could have professional aspirations in 1945, but the only job you could get would be a pin, over in, what is it, Griffith Stadium?
Yeah.
Or you'd be a peanut vendor or something.
Yeah, a coach can make any suggestion he wants to, but I don't think it's just like Larry Brown leaving Philadelphia. Yeah. You can't, when you got a bunch of jackasses and you can't discipline. They have all these big long-term contracts that you probably didn't have anything to do with. I think Larry would just like to go someplace and teach good sound basketball.
It's a different world.
It's a different world now, because whoever heard of a kid getting $90 million?
To just sign a shoe contract.
Yeah, just to sign a shoe contract. My first year at Winston-Salem, I made, I had a big salary, $1,800. My wife was also a teacher, and as a result of that, we put the 18 and 18 together, and I think we built a strong family. I think I ended up a pretty fair coach, and most of those kids that I coached during those, I guess the first 20 years, most of those kids graduated. You got to fight a kid to keep him in school, fight him to go to class, and do that sort of thing. That's not good, not at all.
Well, by the way, you're talking about contracts. I don't know if you guys saw it this afternoon or not. Reebok, now this is the honest truth, Reebok has actually signed a contract with a 3-year-old.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, a 3-year-old who apparently has the ability to hit a bunch of consecutive shots on an 8-foot basket, and they actually signed him to a contract, 3 years old.
Well, I have a 3-year-old grandson, and we're trying to get him to step off on the right foot.
Carl, I'm going to let you go. Thanks very much for calling. Have a good day now. Yeah, so that is not helping at all, is it?
No, I think the big
offering all this big money.
Well, yeah, the money thing I think is good for as far as the kids are concerned. But when you see the local AAU programs, and we have a good AAU program in Winston-Salem. Those guys, the coaches spend a lot of time with them, and we've had a lot of youngsters that have come through our program here, and they've gone on to college.
Let's take this call. Speak up, caller. Thanks for calling.
Good evening.
Yes, sir.
Coach James, who do you think was your best team when you was at Winston-Salem State, and how many players did you send to the pros that you could remember? Because you should be so sharp. I know you know the answer. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Go ahead.
We had 8 different championship teams. The team that I was really proudest of was the first one, 1953. And you didn't have any of these so-called big-name stars. In the 50s, the 60s, and 70s, it was these kids could have played anywhere in the country. It was a kind of an entrapment deal. And what I mean by entrapment is that most of my recruiting was done in the Northeast, up around Washington, Philadelphia, New York. And as a result of that, those kids could have been Division I, II, any other type ball player.
Let's take this call. Yeah, speak up, caller. Thanks for calling.
I want to say hello to Chief. This is Ruff, man.
Ruff, it's good to see you the other night.
Yes, good to see you too, man. Happy birthday again.
Thank you. I hope I can make 80 more.
Well, I say you got as good a chance as anybody.
All right. Thank you.
Take it easy.
So, that year in Forsyth County, Winston-Salem, I remember reading the Frank Spencer column. And he was really saying how basketball, because Atkins won it that year, and Winston-Salem State won it that year. He was saying in the article how basketball was really becoming a sport here in North Carolina.
Basketball's always been a good sport, but
it wasn't as big. You know, it just seemed to me he was saying it wasn't that big.
Well, you didn't
at
have,
that time. I think car racing was the big thing in North
well, car racing was big, but football was was a sport that most people
Supported.
yeah.
Mhm.
You didn't have gyms. Do you realize between Charlotte and Raleigh, there are 6 buildings that hold over 20,000 people now? And that's something else. Charlotte will end up, when they get the new Coliseum,
Mhm.
the smallest one seats about 14,000. That's the size of Winston-Salem's Coliseum.
Mhm.
They have the present Coliseum, and the other Coliseum is going to be equally as big, and it's going to be uptown, and as convenient as possible.
Mhm.
See, the thing that's so amazing to me as a black man, and this, yeah, you are a black reporter, aren't you? Yeah, okay.
Yes, sir.
But the thing that's so amazing to me is that they figured that the type of ball that we're playing now, up speed, quick, pick and roll, and we were running outside screens and what they called the pick and roll 50 years ago,
Yeah,
way back when your
yeah.
daddy, when your father was coaching.
Yeah.
And they called it our basketball. And what they meant by that is that the black kids are a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
And instead of actually describing it as colored folks basketball, when you had to describe it, you had to require it to our basketball. And the amazing thing now is that
It's everybody playing our basketball.
yeah, that's just it. We have 11 black coaches in the NBA, and about 80% of the personnel on most of those squads is the same thing.
You're right.
The other surprise that's going to
All the kids coming out of high school are black.
yeah, I know that, but you notice how many foreign
Foreigners,
players?
yeah, I know you was gonna mention that.
See,
but
we used to take teams down in South America and overseas, and sometimes we'd get our brains beat out. But you didn't have to report that to the newspaper every day.
Thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it very much so. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a live call-in show. We're here June the 5th, 2003, and you can call in and ask Coach Gaines any questions you'd like to ask him at 725-0109. You're now watching the AAP magazine. Who inspired you as a child?
A lot of people that inspired me. My mother was a good athlete, and my father was a hunter, a fisherman, and all of the experiences that they were going through, the fishing, hunting, tennis, basketball. For example, my mother often told me, somebody beat us one night, and she said, "How does it feel to lose?" I didn't know really what she meant. She says, "We played 2 years at Lincoln High School." That was a black high school in Paducah.
Mm-hmm.
And we never lost a game. How does it feel to lose? And I think that was some of my first inspiration, because it's pretty rough going home when your mother asking you,
How does it feel to lose?
Yeah.
So you didn't lose any games? You
No,
played
yeah.
basketball and football in
Yeah,
high school?
Yeah, play basketball and football. She just played basketball.
Mm-hmm.
The team that she played on evidently was very, very good, because those people kept in touch with each other for a long, long time. Then another big inspiration I had was the Boy Scout program. Tommy Withrow. Tommy's dead now,
Mm-hmm.
but he had just graduated from Tennessee State, Tennessee A&I.
Yeah,
It is now. Probably the smartest man that I've ever been associated with was Eddie Hurt. Eddie Hurt was my football and basketball coach. Morgan had about 500 students, I think, when I went there, and graduated in the 45 there. Then in the sports world as such, there have been so many people who had achieved and were achieving at that time that everybody wanted to be like them.
Uh-huh.
And that's one of the things I think that's missing now. Our participating athletes are not good role models. There's a ball game that should be starting about now with Tim Duncan, with San Antonio. And I think if an athlete would just
watch his mannerisms and watch the way he conducts himself. You don't need all that beating chest on your chest and all that kind of crap to draw attention. You do it by performance, clean living, and setting examples. And
Well, he's a cut above, you know, and I think not being raised up over here in the ghettos of North America probably has contributed to that. You know, he comes from the Virgin Islands, so I mean,
I think so.
the lifestyle down there is much more low key, and he was a swimmer. That's what his major sport
Oh, he was an athlete.
Well, I understand, but he
was an athlete,
concentrated
but
on
his
swimming.
concentration was on swimming. But
Right. And you have to be real low-key to swim now. I'm a swimmer myself. So you can't get
Yeah,
excited swimming.
No, I've seen you swim. I've seen you play basketball. So, I mean, we won't discuss your we won't discuss your talents on this.
Okay,
program.
now let me ask you this.
Yeah.
When you were recruiting James Worthy, you weren't thinking about the fact that he had been also recruited by Carolina. And you weren't thinking about the fact that maybe he wanted to go to the bigger school. You
No, I
weren't
didn't think
thinking-
that at all. Because,
Okay.
see, I just saw him 2 weeks ago. He's going to be inducted into the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame. He had a brother at one of the that was older than him in school, and he wanted to get in college. I tried to recruit him as a football player because there were certain places well, Gastonia is one of those places. They had a fellow, Dynamite Dunn, who was the coach down there, and Dynamite Dunn, if you played for Dynamite, you were fundamentally sound, and that was the reason I wanted him. It didn't cross my mind the second time about who wanted to go to Carolina or State. That
But
sort of
that
thing.
did affect your recruiting,
Oh, yeah.
didn't it? Because the kids began to think in terms of comparing schools and that kind of thing?
Well, you know, segregation had its ills, and it also had some disadvantages also, because actually, during my first 15 years, you can name the black athletes that were going to predominantly black schools. Between A&T, Cal Irvin, and
Right.
Greensboro, and
North Carolina College,
North
Tennessee
Carolina
State.
College, yeah, at Tennessee State, Jake
Gaither and Florida A&M, yeah.
In other words, actually, the cream of the crop, we had them.
Right.
We knew we had those boys. And sooner or later, those other people discovered that these kids could run a little faster,
Right,
a little harder, and
right.
they first picked up one boy, then all of a sudden they had to get him a roommate.
Right.
Then after the roommate, they
We were sold to the idea that it would be better and closer to success, maybe.
well, the only thing about it, I think anybody in athletics or anybody, whether it's horse racing or stock car racing, if you get the product and you know what to do with it, you can win. And that's exactly what they found out.
How did you inspire the kids that you were able to recruit to balance academics and athletics?
Well, actually, as far as professional athletics was concerned, that wasn't in their head. In other words,
At that time,
at
early
that
in
time,
the history.
yeah, 41, 45, and most of the youngsters that I picked up out of New York, Washington, Philadelphia, they wanted to go to college, and it was my job to get them in college and to get them out. About 90% of our kids actually graduated, and we were very, very proud of that.
So they really didn't have the lure of professional.
There was no such thing as professional athletics.
Just
to that
wasn't, the
extent.
lure wasn't there.
No, it wasn't there. No.
And I think Cleo was your first
He was a-
NBA draft choice.
Yeah, he was
wasn't
the #1 draft choice. Good to be here.
My man. Coach Gaines has written a book. He has not written a book. Mr. Clinton Johnson Clint Johnson has written a book titled They Call Me Big House. As you can see there, this is uncorrected galley proof here. It's a hardback cover, but it's a very interesting book, and it details his life in very many aspects, and it also reveals a lot of information that some of you may know and some of you may not know. But okay. A college football player who tipped the scales at 265 was big news in those days. People wanted to get a look at this huge Kentuckian, so I garnered some fame before any games were even played. One photo from 1941 shows me with my arm extended. Standing under my arm is Lewis Ballard, another freshman. I might have been more of a doughboy than I wanted to admit, carrying a little extra fat that had never mattered much in high school. Coach Hurt knew I would be playing against the best from many high schools, so he decided to play a little psychology on me. During one of our early workouts in my freshman year, he began to question my weight, asking me how much of my bulk was fat, how much was muscle, and how much that fat slowed me down. Even though he and I knew that I was a fast runner for a big man, Coach Hurt challenged me to a foot race. He wanted to prove in his mind and in my own mind that I was slower than I could be because I weighed more than he wanted to weigh. I looked at this scrawny little man who must have been at least twice my age. I readily agreed to race him to prove I was not as out of shape as he was claiming. I had forgotten that the man was also the coach of the best college track team, black or white, in the nation. He easily beat me in our lap around the track. When he finished, he was lounging around the finish line smiling, while I was huffing and puffing my way back to where we had started. So when I returned to campus for my sophomore year, I had gone from a slightly flabby 265 to a solidly muscled, strong as a bull 238. When Coach Hurt saw what I had become by lifting weights and running, he challenged me to another foot race. In this race, in my second year, I beat him, though I recall the margin was somewhat close. It wasn't until years later, when I was coaching young men to have confidence in themselves, that I began to wonder if Coach Hurt had let me win that second foot race.
I think that was
taught you a lesson.
when that's the best psych job that's ever been put on me. Coach must have weighed 135 pounds, and when he saw that 265 my freshman year, and I'm huffing and puffing, and I was a big kid, I was strong, I thought I was quick, and here's a man twice my age, almost 3 times my age, beat me. We didn't run around the track, it was just a sprint, but he beat me in the sprint. Came back to sophomore year, I was in much better shape, but he pulled a psych job on me. And
you think he let you win the second time?
Yep. It's so easy to get psyched, and youngsters are that way. They don't want anybody to outdo them. But I never did live that first race down. Here's an old
But
dude.
you learned a lot from that, didn't you?
I certainly did.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
He was probably, of the individuals I've been associated with, probably one of the smartest men that I've ever had an opportunity to work with. Mm-hmm. Every problem that I had, if I went to him with it, whether it happened to be calculus, and you'd have to really appreciate his family life because he didn't have any children, but Ms. Hurt was all of our girlfriends. She just died last year. Mm-hmm. And I think she was 101 years old. So as a result of that, she took pretty good care of us. But this guy had an answer for everything.
Smart man.
One of the most intelligent individuals that I've ever seen.
Good people skills.
Huh?
Good people skills.
Just good skills, period.
Yeah, all the way around.
Yeah.
Coach, we got a call. Go ahead, caller. Speak up. Thanks for calling.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Congratulations, Coach Gaines, on your book. I would like in your career, what is one thing that you have not done that you would like to do?
What is one thing that I would like to do
that you have not
that
done?
I have not done?
Yes.
I'd like to see all of my boys that came through Winston-Salem State very successful in jobs and putting more time in community action programs.
Yes, congratulations, Coach Gaines.
Thank you.
And I'd like one question. I was watching ESPN's top 25 coaches of all time, and I noticed that you were omitted from that list, which I think was very unjust. But I was wondering, did they contact you for any input on any of these coaches? And also, we only had one other African-American on there, which was Eddie Robinson. And I just felt that you were overly slighted. I did not feel good about that at all. And if you have any comments concerning that, it was coaches of all fields, basketball, football, baseball, hockey. But I did not even see your name on there at all.
Well, the only thing about you got to realize is they had to recount the vote in Texas, what was it, Florida, twice before they came out with a winner.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of cases, the ballots are not sent to all of the coaches, and people are admitted. You might not quite realize it. I mean, we've made a lot of progress as far as society is concerned, but a lot of people still don't know that these brown boys over here are coaching. The athletes are dominating in just about every sport actually that you can think of now. But I didn't have an opportunity to vote.
First inkling my New York recruits had that life was going to change for them for the next 4 years of their lives was when they changed trains in Washington, D.C. In the station, a conductor gathered all of the black people from all the cars and took them to the colored cars. These New Yorkers had no idea why they were being moved to other cars until the conductors told them that it was the law in most southern states that black people could not ride in the same train cars with whites. That was a cultural shock. Most of these kids had gone to all black schools before they lived in black neighborhoods. Few of them had ever been out of the city of New York, but they were used to riding buses and subways side by side with white people. You talk about a player who was downtown, and the policeman pulled the gun on him to get off the sidewalk or something. And talk about that for a minute. You know, the kids you recruited out of New York, Kentucky, and you said a lot of times your kids out of New York had problems with your kids out of the Midwest because they were so structured in the Midwest, and the kids out of New York were a little faster. They were fast break styles.
Well, we fought the Civil War for a couple of years.
Uh-huh.
In other words, the Easterners were excellent ball handlers. They'd pick you off in the middle of the floor. The kids from the Midwest were excellent shooters.
Uh-huh.
They put a lot into it. And as far as the segregation pattern was concerned, I don't think that you could have found any more segregation than we found in Baltimore. When I graduated from college in 1941, a black woman couldn't try on a hat in Washington or Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
The youngsters who lived in New York City, most of them lived in either Brooklyn or Harlem. Mm-hmm. Some of them might not have even known that New Jersey was across the river.